Hello, everybody. If you're checking in with us, we got about another minute to go before we go actually start the program. And I'm waiting for our guest to chime in, and he's a very special guest. I can't wait to ask him all the questions that I have, which are numerous after all the research that I've been doing. But here we are, folks. Welcome to the Deplorable Report. Avenging fake news with fact-based truth. And today we have a very special guest that we're going to be linking in. This would be Jim Waurishuk. Jim is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and he's got a resume that's so long I could take the rest of this program reading it, but I want to share with you the most important for our purposes, the most important parts about it. And I'm getting a phone call that's very strange, and I don't think it's related to the show. So now Colonel Waurishuk has served a 30-year career as a senior strategic intel and special missions intel officer. Also a political military affairs officer, and he's also served in combat support tours in Grenada, Panama, Afghanistan, and Iraq. So we have a real treat visiting us here today. He's also done numerous strategic and special operations, special missions, and intelligence missions. And what's really critical for today's message is that he was a former member of the White House National Security Council, the NSC, and Situation Room staff. He was a senior intelligence aide to the NSC, and we're going to be talking about General Flynn today since he's so much in the news. But he was also he has spoken on behalf of both the Trump campaign and President Trump as a keynote speaker. He was here in Tampa, for those of you who live in the area, and he introduced our president to America before he was our president, obviously, as candidate Trump, and he introduced him as the national security president. Boy, how much that is true today, isn't it? So currently, and I want to let him tell you about what he's doing currently, but he is the chairman of the Hillsborough Republican Executive Committee. So for those of you who live in the Tampa Bay area, this is going to be a real special treat for you. I'm going to be talking with the Colonel about all things China, and I just watched Bill Hemmer in a really interesting interview where he showed some clips of our State Department, our Secretary of State, Pompeo, speaking. They're getting pretty tough on China, so we're going to want to get the Colonel's input on that, because he's got some pretty interesting things to tell us as far as that goes. And in the meantime, as we wait for him, what we're going to do is go over a little bit about the last 4 weeks of blogging that I've been doing and podcasting that I've been doing, which, as you know, we have made quite a bit of push into what's going on behind China and this pandemic. And a lot of things are coming out right now. I noticed, and I'm going to be talking to the Colonel about that as soon as he joins us, but I did notice that a couple days ago, the ODNI came out with some statement. John Roberts from Fox News questioned our president about that. He questioned him, and he said, hey, how come? I'm just looking to see if the Colonel has joined us somewhere here. This is the first time, as you know, probably, since if you've been following me, this is the first time that I've actually brought a guest on. So this is all kind of brand new, and bear with me as I make sure that we are doing the right things here. At any rate, so he just, Bill Hemmer was just interviewing Chang, that specialist on China. And they came out with some really interesting things because, a couple days ago, John Roberts asked the president, well, what about ODNI? What about their statement? The president seemed like he was kind of caught off guard there. saying that the ODNI stated, and Richard Grinnell is actually the secretary, the acting secretary over there of the department, and I really like Grinnell. I think he's going to be fantastic, but we're going to be getting a new secretary very, very shortly, it looks like. But at any rate, so I'm really curious to ask the colonel, well, what is this all about? I mean, if the ODNI is basically saying that there is no real evidence to show that the virus came out of Wuhan, out of the labs there, there's some sort of disconnect there, and I want to find out, see if the colonel knows anything about that or not, because the president in his briefing or in his town hall last night was sharing a little bit of information. He says he's got evidence that it is definitely coming out of the Wuhan lab. Now I just saw where Hemmer was talking about it, and it certainly seems as though that's what's going on. Now it's getting down to, was it intentional? And according to Dr. Chang, we'll probably never know the answer to that, simply because China, and I wrote about this in one of my blogs, that China sent some of their top government guys. Which blog was that? That was way back on March 25th. The Real Killer Isn't a Virus. It's the left's war on capitalism. If you haven't read that one, that's a really good read, and it's pretty prophetic in what it has to say, because I mentioned in there that China sent in there some top government people, and that was based on information from Mosher, who is a Chinese expert. And so that's where that came from. But he said that they went in and they destroyed all the evidence at that time. So that probably is what happened. But you would think, actually, that they would be able to tell from the genetic the genome sequence of this virus. You would think. For some reason, it's not allowing me to connect. Oh, geez. It looks like the colonel is having a little bit of trouble getting in. I wonder why that is. Let me just answer him back there. And let me see if I can't do something on my end to let him in here. Let's see. Let me get back to Facebook. Sorry about this, guys, but you're kind of like my... Let me resend this link, and hopefully... Hopefully he'll be able to click on that and get in, because he's got so many answers to the questions that we need. And if this is not going to work, then I guess we're going to have to refigure this. He's typing something right now. Can we just audio by phone? Geez, I don't know, Colonel. I'm not really a techie. But we might be able to do that, actually. Let me see if I can't get a hold of him by phone. And I was hoping to be able to get him on here, because I finally figured out how to do split screen. And I do want to ask him about what Dr. Chang had to say. But more importantly, first, I want to get into some of the General Flynn stuff that is going on right now with his attorney, Sidney Powell. And I want to find out where the colonel thinks that's going, because I really thought that by now it would have been released by the judge, that Judge Sullivan. Let's see if I can get the colonel on the phone, and then that way I can put him on speakerphone, and maybe we can hear his answers. And I hope that some of you all will chime in here and let me know how this is coming across. Hi, Colonel, how are you? There's always something, isn't it? I thought you had all those special links. Well, let's do this. Let's do this. Would you mind doing it by phone? I'm going to put you on speakerphone. And okay, the only thing is, like, I'm doing a podcast here. So what I'm going to do is put you on speakerphone. And can you hear me? Okay. Okay, I don't know if they're going to be able to hear you very well. So I'm going to ask some of my listeners to chime in and let me know if they can hear the Colonel. I've already introduced you, so I've let my audience know pretty much what your background is. And I thank you so much, by the way, for joining the Deplorable Report today, before I forget to thank you, and for your service, your continuing service. Because I understand you're busy. What can you tell us about what you're up to these days?
Well, I'm involved in putting out a lot of articles that deal with the coronavirus, what I call the Chinese virus or the Chinese Wuhan virus. I'm not going to call it the coronavirus or COVID-19. I don't believe in calling it that. I believe in calling it based on where it originated. I just did a big project for Fox News that addressed, was the virus actually man-made, and was it potentially weaponized to do what it did? And my argument was this virus was not naturally occurring. It wasn't just something that occurs in nature like most viruses do on an annual basis, whether it's a flu or whatever, and it develops and spreads, and we get the annual flu, a different strain every year, and we have to come up with something to counter it. But it's there's something there. This is one of the reasons the Chinese government has been so hands-off, don't want to let anyone in to investigate or to look at how things transpired, particularly at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where the suspect virus was manipulated or somehow created. And we have a big relationship in our medical research, people who do biological kind of studies with not only the Wuhan Institute, but we have people who travel around the world. Canada has a number of sites. We have the University of Texas at Galveston has their site where they do this, and these scientists work all the time on each other, and suddenly they have become hands-off. We don't want you to help investigate. We don't want you to help us figure out what's. They're obviously hiding something. Their cover story was that it originated in the wet markets, and a lot of people who have been studying this have pretty much disproved it from the standpoint that that people eat isn't even sold at that market. And the other thing is where you had those who have looked at the virus said it's kind of you take a coronavirus, which is spread by bats, but then what it appears is they've institutionally, call it man-made, caused it to morph or manipulated in a laboratory, and they used viruses that can be contracted by humans: SARS, MERS, AIDS, HIV, which are the viruses that can penetrate human cells and then spread within the body. And I'm not a biologist by any means to discuss that, but the principle is there. So So once you start manipulating things in a laboratory, it's no longer naturally forming. It's man-made. And, the president has come out last week and said he believes there's something there, and now we're anticipating to hear something. The intelligence community is working on it. They have to be very they have to position themselves, because you don't want to reveal what their sources are. And so we've heard things from the intelligence community say that it wasn't. The president says he's got information that it has, so obviously he's got it from somebody. But there's been other people, and I was working with Fox News. I wrote a report that gave a number of scenarios of how this happens, and I look at it as a potential. Somebody was working on something to be used as a biological weapon. And when you read Unrestricted Warfare, a book produced in 1999 by two Chinese military officers, basically covers that. And we've known countries have used biological weapons over the course of history, particularly since World War I. So, there are countries, Russia, China, and others, and we even have experimented with that years ago. We don't really do it anymore. We look at it from the standpoint of how do we prevent it, and that's what Fort Detrick, Maryland does. They don't get involved in creating sinister kind of viral biological weapons. They look at it from the standpoint of what are other countries producing, what are the things that they're doing, and how would we prevent it. So that's kind of what I've been working on.
Well, that sounds.
And the rest is stuff like Mike Flynn and other things that have been going on. So, I've been pretty busy with that.
Yeah, I'll bet you have, and I do want to ask you about that here in a second. But I really want to go back to this China thing. I kind of wanted to start off talking about Flynn, but with since we got into China, I'm really. You know that I've written a couple of blogs here in the past couple of weeks, and I've done a lot of research on this as well. I'm really confused, though, how our ODNI could be so out of step with what the president is saying. I don't understand.
Well, that's a good question, and that's my point. The second they come out and confirm anything that the president said, that automatically, they from an intelligence standpoint have to be very careful of how they present what they're doing. They're not going to necessarily, the president can say what he wants, and the president can declassify anything he wants, and he also can create confusion with our enemies, so to speak, where the intel community says one thing and he says another thing. Well, now they're, just think of the Chinese thing. Well, wait a minute, this intel community is saying this and he's saying that. What's going on? Why is there a difference in there? So we don't know what was behind that.
I see.
And he's got, a new director there who he is very trustful of. And favorable to.
You're talking about Richard Grinnell.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so
I like him.
I always use the word knee-jerk. Before we go after something that was said in the media based on either what the president said, let's look at it perhaps as disinformation, PSYOP, and I'll caveat that. PSYOP is always truth, but there's what we call black PSYOP and gray PSYOP. The U.S. doesn't do propaganda. We'll never do propaganda. Somebody may portray it as that, but propaganda, by definition, is lies. Now, we may put out misinformation to confuse somebody or deception to confuse our enemies, but we don't normally deal in propaganda, whereas the Chinese, the Russians, communism is notorious for propaganda because communism is built on a lie. Everything they tell you is about power, control, and it has to be, and it's built on lies, and they have to use it, and that's what they do. And we know over the course of history that's what's been going on. But there's a lot of information being put up now. The president last night, if you watched his speech at Fox News, he mentioned that today more information would be coming out. He didn't say how or where, but they asked him about what the DNI said, and he said you'll hear more information today. I'm sitting here with bated breath, waiting to hear what's going to come out, if it comes out today, or maybe it won't come out today.
No, but I did hear. I don't know if you saw that interview with Bill Hemmer and Dr. Chang. Just right before my show started, actually, it was really very interesting, and they were talking about how the Chinese sent in high-level security to the lab and destroyed all the evidence. So we'd probably we'd probably never know. But my question about
let me just say,
sure,
you just raised a really good point. Destroying high-level information and everything with high-level people to do that. Why would they do that?
Of course.
If they have been working with other countries on developing, whether it's vaccines or antibodies or trying to learn about other viruses, and that's what these labs are supposed to be doing. How do we protect the population, and how do we get a handle on what's coming next? Why would they destroy information? You only destroy information is when you're trying to hide something.
Absolutely, yeah. It's quite obvious that, and we knew about them destroying that quite a while ago. My question would be, though, if they can, and I know you're not a scientist or a biologist, but it seems to me that with the genome sequence, they're able to tell that the East Coast got the European coronavirus, right? And the West Coast got the Asian coronavirus. So it would seem to me that somewhere in there, they'd be able to tell kind of whether it was manufactured, engineered, or what.
Well, that's a good point. And the question is, why did it happen that way? And, I'm of the belief, now it's my opinion based on what I'm reading, and everybody reads their own and comes up with their own opinions because we don't know for sure yet. But, when this started to spread, how did it spread so quickly and in a matter of weeks get into all 50 states? It's all, people who, the president shut down travel as he should have, and he did it despite a lot of criticism, but in the end it appears, now people are saying, well, you didn't do it fast enough.
Yeah, the same ones who were complaining about it.
That's politics. No matter what he does, they're going to counter with something else. But it's really interesting that it spread the way it did. And when you look at, how did it happen? Why didn't it just concentrate in one area, maybe gradually spread, or how did it go? So, I look at were people locally trying to cause it to spread more? I have my own suspicions. I don't want to put those.
Yeah, no, I
thought for another time.
Right.
But I saw a lot of, it's as if people were wanting the numbers to go up to make it look bad. What was the reasoning behind that? And now we're starting to hear that the WHO numbers were wrong, and it's like 50% as bad as people suspected it to be. But nobody in the media or the political left is willing to say that, even though the CDC put new numbers, revised their website with new numbers. It was like around 37,300 versus 61 or whatever thousand it is. So why is that? And then we find out, and we're seeing people talking about, well, we just automatically, anybody who died during this period automatically died from the virus.
Right.
I mean, there's been enough people who have come out and said that. Why is that? What's going on? And some people are saying, well, because, if someone has the virus or is, they're determined but to have the virus, the medical facility or hospital gets $13,000 or $14,000. If they die, they get, that facility gets $26,000 is the number I saw. Or if they needed to go on a ventilator, then the number goes up to $39,000 for every single person.
I saw that.
So
let me ask you this, because to kind of change gears, but staying on the same subject, because I've done a lot of research on the Bill Gates, China, WHO, Fauci, CDC. And I'm really concerned about that. In the research for my book, and for those who are just tuning in, if you're not familiar with Rules for Deplorables, that's the book you see behind me here. But I'm curious, and I know you've read my book, right, Colonel?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a point in my book where I talk about Hillary's State Department and USAID, and that George Soros was really behind them, and in fact, he's even gotten our State Department to send copies of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which is, of course, what my book is based on, the tactics, Saul Alinsky tactics. But George Soros even got our State Department under Hillary to send a bunch of books over to these Eastern Bloc countries that to basically teach them how to be community organizers and flip them from being free market countries to socialist. But one of the things I found in my research for my book was that with his connections with USAID, I found that to be really disconcerting. But then here on February 7th, our State Department under Pompeo sent 17.8 tons of medical supplies to the Chinese people. I mean, how?
Nope. I'm gonna talk about that.
Okay, please.
That is a propaganda story.
Really?
Put out by an organization called America Bridge 21st Century, and it is an organization of George Soros.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. Where can I find information on that?
This has been a big story out there, and it's been difficult for the U.S. to get behind it. But there were a number of private U.S. organizations, private citizens, who decided we need to help the Chinese people. Okay. Now, nothing wrong with the Chinese people. They're slaves under the CCP, just like the Iranian people or just like the Russian people. They don't have a choice of who their leadership is, because their leadership is going to always be elected, and unless they are able to do a revolution against the government, they are beholden to whoever leads them, and that's the case in China right now. And we've got to deal with them, and the president has been dealing with them, and he's been, the globalists, many of who are in our country, have provided China and given China what they have now, and allowed them to become as powerful economically as they are over the last 20 or 30 years. That's another discussion. But
really interesting. I had not heard that being countered, so we need to step up our game on getting that kind of information, disinformation.
What happened was we were helping the Chinese people, not necessarily the government, the Chinese people. Now, Trump, when he deals with Xi and the Chinese government, he's doing what he needs to do. And I mean, what's really upsetting to the Chinese government, most people don't realize, Trump has orchestrated where corporations and companies that have gone there to set up are returning to the United States in droves, which is part of why our economy has been doing so good. Trump has offered them the opportunities to come back and say, hey, we want you, Trump is all about America first, and let's make it in America. And a lot of that has happened, and they've been pulling out. It's been, in between that and trade has really been destroying the Chinese economy. I mean, they're really feeling it. And when you have 1.6 billion people and all of a sudden there's no work for them to do, you have a major problem on your hands. And that's what's been happening with Trump bringing all this back. And when this virus started to spread, we have a lot of Americans who are working in China, around in different places around the country, and we started sending. This was prior to the January 31st when the president cut everything off. We started sending planes to get people out of China, Americans who were there because it looked like this virus was spreading. And And so when they sent these planes over, these private organizations, companies who had purchased, I had the amount of 17 or 18 million
tons
of medical supplies, said, can we put these on there for the Chinese people? And the U.S. said, yeah, okay, put them on. Not to the Chinese government, just to the towns where the U.S. was. So we don't know, when we send planes, we don't send them in empty. We send them in like, okay, here's the stuff that the Americans, like we have a lot of charitable organizations, churches and medical organizations that do humanitarian stuff, and they provide and pay for medical, whether it's medicine or blankets or water or whatever. So we loaded these 17 or 18,000 tons of relief supplies on American planes or chartered American planes that went in to these cities and dropped off that stuff, and Americans were put on the planes to get out. Now, that was all in the works when this all started. We started getting information that the virus was going down, and that's why on, I think it was February 7th, where some of these planes arrived with the medical supplies.
Right.
But the propaganda campaign by Soros was put out on April 23rd or so that said, and there was an ad that was released by America Bridge 21st Century, which is a George Soros organization, that basically put the word out to the U.S. State Department loaded planes up with medical supplies to China, and they didn't go with the rest of the story saying it was privately funded. It wasn't U.S. government taxpayer funded aid. It was money. It was goods, medical supplies, goods from private charitable organizations. That we said, okay, we'll put them on our planes to bring it in, not to the government, but just to the local towns where these planes were, or cities where the planes were going in. The misconception that Soros automatically wanted to put out was that the U.S. government was doing this, and that's not the case.
Yeah, let me tell you, I just looked it up from my blog, okay, because you know I'm really, really careful on my sources. And this came out of USA Today, and this was the quote that I took out of USA Today. The U.S. Department of State also donated 17.8 tons of medical equipment to China in February. And going on to say the mass donation included masks, gowns, gauze, respirators, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of interesting that would be in USA Today. And if it is, then why,
Well, USA Today is part and parcel with the political left and the mainstream media, part of it, that they're going to put out anything that they can to disparage anything that the Trump administration is doing, and they're going to go with the story just like CNN and MSNBC. And
they're not quite as bad as those other guys.
So Post and all the rest. I mean, they're all in on it. And I hate to say it, even some people at Fox News.
Oh, I know.
Who Fox has gradually been moving in the wrong direction, so to speak, and a lot of them have pointedly asked questions that were intended to be embarrassing to the president or put him off guard. He even mentioned that last night when he interviewed. He said, he told that to Brett Baer and Martha. He said, "You've asked that question and you put me into a very precarious situation
that
hurts my negotiating ability as president." And he, I don't know how many people picked up on that, but he was angry over Fox News for asking a question. And I know they go through the ground rules on questions that can be asked, but he let it known that you're not helping America out. You're working against me as president, and he's the master negotiator. And if a question gets asked that puts him into a situation where he doesn't want to answer it,
obviously,
like anybody else, it hurts his ability. So that was made quite clear, and I haven't seen any post analysis yet on it. I'll get a chance to probably look tonight, but that's what we're dealing with in this, where every single thing that is said is either spun or countered, by the mainstream media.
No, I've thought that many times in the past. Why would they ask that? That's such a stupid question, because no matter what comes out of his mouth, you can't believe it could be true or not true, because it would just tip his hand so bad. Let me ask you this question then. This gets into the Bill Gates thing, because a lot of my supporters and my followers are really into what's going on with Bill Gates and these vaccines and all that stuff. And one of my most recent blogs, called Beware Bill Gates Pandora Box of Pandemic Vaccines, I uncovered so much that really surprised me, because obviously he's thought of as this really benevolent philanthropist, and he helps the whole world in all these awful diseases and what have you. And a lot of the programs that I researched don't have a very favorable outcome, because either the people who further or advance his vaccine programs, they do a lot of bullying. There's a lot of paralysis and deaths caused by his vaccines. I mean, I got turned on to this by that big Robert F. Kennedy Jr. letter that was floating around, and I was just curious. So the further I got into it, the more I realized not everything in his letter was true, but an awful lot of it was. And I've got two questions for you as far as that goes. And one, I don't know if you read that podcast or that blog of mine or not, but Gates mentions two meetings that he had with Trump back in 2017. And Gates says this, in quotes: "In both of those meetings, Trump, asked me, Gates, if vaccines weren't a bad thing, because he was considering a commission to look into the ill effects of vaccines. And I, Bill Gates, said, oh no, that's a dead end. That would be a bad thing. Don't do that." But he mentioned that Trump was super interested in the idea of universal flu vaccine. So my question to you, based on what I've read about his global initiatives, it really concerns me about what we can trust, actually. What do you think is Bill Gates and Trump's relationship with that?
Well, first, from a relationship standpoint, Bill Gates and Donald Trump are both billionaires, and that interview was early on in his presidency. I don't remember the date, may have happened even before he was inaugurated. And, so the commonality is their wealth and those kind of circles they run in. But Bill Gates has really, as it turns out, a lot of, and you made a good point, a lot of people looked at Bill Gates as a benevolent person who is a humanitarian, and he wants to use his wealth, being one of the top, I guess, 3 wealthiest men in the world.
Yes.
From his philanthropy type work to help people and everything. But then when you look at some of the organizations that he is closely tied to, and it takes people like you who dig and do the research and find out this guy is up to some pretty nefarious kind of stuff.
He really is.
And so, the president's question, when I read it, I said, okay, Trump is saying, you really think this stuff is good? And he wants to get an answer out of Bill Gates now. Fast forward to the last few weeks, President Trump came out and said, we are not going to do a vaccine for this. And, whatever Fauci and others are saying, the president, when it comes to, he's going to battle. This is going to be a battle. It's going to be ugly between the Democrats and, one of the things.
Really, the globalists. You can now kind of put them all into the globalist
you might
basket.
put them all in the same boat. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
That could be one of your next books.
I've thought about it. soon as I get through this.
How to fight the globalists on this, because really they're really all one and the same. But one of the things I've been telling people is, we've dealt with Russia collusion and the deep state, and we looked at the deep state as being embedded in our FBI and Justice Department and intel community. And when people like Dr. Fauci and Birx came on board and started, like within the first week when I started hearing some of the things they're saying, I said, wait a minute, where are they coming from? And I started talking with a few folks, and I said, well, the deep state is also embedded in our national health system, and the NIH, and obviously the FDA, and the CDC. Not that the CDC is really a government agency; it's more like the Postal Service, kind of like a.
Well, we don't really see them. We're not seeing them coming out.
It's obvious now, after we've been going through this for the last several months, that they are saying some horrible, scary things, and we talked about that earlier about you got to count every single death as COVID-19 related. That's dangerous. That's scary.
Is Trump cleaning these organizations up?
And we have managed to take down a $22 trillion economy in a matter of 2 months. And it's this. And now we're starting to see 37,300 people actually died. That's a less than average flu season.
Well, Trump did just come out and say we're going to be seeing about 100,000 people by the end of the summer. Who's he listening to anymore?
To see if that transpires, because even today, as of like 1 or 2 o'clock, I was listening to Rush Limbaugh, and there was a news break, and they had a feed from I forget what news outlet that was covering the feed of the news at during the commercial breaks, and they continued to use the number 61,000. I've been looking all weekend long at the CDC charts that says it's been revised down to 37,000. So the mainstream media doesn't want to change that, and so there's I put out on Facebook earlier, it said there's a battle going on regarding information, disinformation, propaganda, psyop between the Trump administration and the mainstream media. It's a fight to the death almost of who's going to get the story out there, and that's what we're dealing with on this. And I anticipate a lot of battles to come up in the next week.
Well, it'll be interesting.
What's the truth?
It'll be interesting, and before we get to Flynn, because we got to get moving on him, so I can get your take on that. But I hope. Can you give us hope? I guess I should ask that Trump is cleaning up these CDCs, the WHO, and that we're gonna be able to trust going forward what they have to tell us.
That is a huge question, and I put some stuff out over the weekend regarding, and maybe this is a good segue to get to Mike Flynn. What William Barr is up against, the corruption in the agencies that Barr oversees with regard to the Attorney General's office and the FBI, and of course he doesn't have jurisdiction over the intel community, but it is just the crimes are so grave, the corruption is so high that, and it's so deep. When I say deep, it's deep in them where people are politically appointed. If you've ever worked in government, I've dealt with it from my military career, having to work inside the intel community, outside the military organizations. like, it's the same thing in the private sector. I have to say, people get jobs because they know people, and, people build relationships, and politics may not necessarily be what it is, but particularly during the Obama administration, and even going back to the Clinton administration, when Bill Clinton was there, and I was, had a number of positions in Washington, D.C. during that time. And when Bill Clinton came in, I watched some of the mindset and some of the thinking, and I said, this is Orwellian. This is one world, big government kind of thing. What the heck's going on? And that's probably started then, maybe a little bit before.
When was that?
George H.W.
Oh, the 90s?
During the Clinton administration. I was working on the White House National Security Council staff, not because I desired to work for Bill Clinton, but you're on orders from the military to work there, and you get to see what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there for just under a year, and I saw a lot of things going on, and it really changed my thinking. I was a hardline career intelligence professional and doing, everything was all about America and everything. And then I started seeing this kind of stuff happening there. And, the rest of my career was always in the back of my mind, what's really going on. And then, I retired just before Obama became president. I'm glad I did. I don't think I could have stomached working.
I mean, you got to hand it. You got
my commander in chief. But
really.
I stayed working in the intel community and in the special operations community, and saw a lot of the things that he was instituting and putting into effect. And now I know what was at work there. So
you got to give them credit. I mean, they really were able to transform our entire, all of the heads of the agencies, and really get some, traction on it.
When you put people in, like John Brennan and Comey, and you can go down the list, and then they hire someone underneath them, and that person hires somebody underneath them. It goes down a number of
layers,
management level layers. Mm-hmm. And now I will be the first one to tell you, when people join the intelligence community, because I can speak to that because that's what I did for over 30 years, they want to do the best possible job, but they get into the corporate think once they get hired, and if you're going to maintain your job, that's what you do. You try to do your job from a professional standpoint of, this is how we do intelligence, or this is how we do, like any other company you work for. The politics aren't supposed to be there. You're doing stuff as a professional from the skill level that you're trained to do, and you're expected to learn and get better and get moved up higher in management. And there is that degree of people there. By and large, 3/4 to 2/3 or more are like that, and they will continue to be that way. It's when you get into the policy decision-making level where you see how, first and foremost, rule of thumb in the intelligence community, we don't spy on American citizens, period. Mm-hmm. We spy on foreigners. The FBI, who is a law enforcement agency, and the Justice Department, which is the legal side of the law enforcement agency, are there to protect American citizens. And if there are Americans doing bad things against Americans in our country, then they will be investigated. And when you have foreigners coming over to this country who may do something bad against Americans, whether they're Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Baader-Meinhof gang from the 80s, or another terrorist group, or a country that is doing things, spying on us, we do counterintelligence and counterterror operations. And when we see them coming here, like we saw prior to 9/11, where people were coming here and training and acting like they were just regular Americans, and it's the job of, and that's another whole discussion on what happened there, but it's the job of the intel community to go to the FBI and say, you know what, we're watching these people infiltrate America. This is who they are, what they're up to. We're handing off to you so that you have the law behind you to investigate them and, if necessary, apprehend and arrest them. So that's what the FBI does. But we don't go after Americans, and we don't go after them politically because we don't like Donald Trump running for president. So we're going to turn the powers of the intelligence community, which was, the FISA orders to spy on Americans to find out, before Donald Trump was watched, Clapper and Comey and Brennan and others were using that capability to spy on their political enemies, and they spied on upwards of 40,000 Americans.
Yeah, let me ask you about that, because as you know now, I mean, I did not know you. We met about 8 months ago, I think, at one of your Trump meetings or rallies there in Hillsborough in Tampa, and only the next day, as I was doing my audio book, I was working on that at the time, and I just happened to be on chapter 9, which is Unmasking the Boogeyman, and it was all about unmasking. And all of a sudden, I realized that that I was reading your name in my narration, and I thought, well, that sounds really familiar. Now, I want to read for my viewers here what book, and I want you to comment on that, because this is a quote, folks, directly out of my book. I quoted the colonel without knowing him, but it says, quote, retired Air Force Colonel James Waurishuk, a 30-year senior intelligence officer who served on the National Security Council and was also deputy director for intel at U.S. Central Command, said that, quote, when you're dealing with the political use of intelligence methods and capabilities with regards to unmasking, you have suspected criminal activity. So now, share with us, if you would, what exactly that unmasking is in a short, kind of easy way to understand.
What happens is you start to intelligence information. I'll make it an example so people can understand a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Starts to see, we have a capability. We sweep all the communications, almost all in the world, and it's all done with massive, powerful computers. It doesn't necessarily know exactly who it is. They see a phone number. Let's say a phone call originates from a cell phone in the United States, and it goes to Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
And so the computer systems, it's done by, satellites and other listening devices, says phone call from, Virginia Beach, Virginia to Sana'a, Yemen. Okay, so it records that, and then what gets recorded is the cell phone number that went there and the cell phone number in Yemen thing. And so tomorrow another one goes, and it pings and says, okay, another phone call. So now there are indicators and warnings that go to an analyst. Now, might be the first time a human gets involved and says, why has there been 2 phone calls to this place? And the next day there's another one, and then that afternoon another one. And so now the interest is, okay, who is talking? So what they have to do is then say, okay, do we know who this phone number is in Virginia Beach? And they would have to go to the FBI or the Justice Department saying, we need to get information on that. They can go to the intel community and say, who's the other phone call? And they can say, well, the other phone call is a known terrorist or someone who is associated with a known terrorist. Okay, now we have probable cause, and I'm being very basic on this, that someone in America is talking to this and so they will get, the intel community will get a record and get the record and say, oh, this phone call is John Smith. Why is John Smith calling Yemen every day? Okay, let's look at it two ways. Let's say he's a business guy and he's calling a supplier who sells some kind of candles or something that he buys, and I look at it and say, okay, it's innocent. Yeah, but the guy's a known terrorist. Okay, why is he doing it? Okay, he is actually working for somebody else, and they start to develop the Nazi guy, and then they find out weapons smuggling or he's doing some kind of planning, and so that's the legal way we're supposed to do it. And you know, they're stored on a computer system, you know, out in Utah. You have to get a warrant to actually listen to that, and by this time they will have gotten a warrant to say, what's he talking about? This we need to find out. We find out, like I just said, he's using his business as. So that kind of stuff happens all the time, and it requires, you know, FISA warrants because he's a private citizen. We can't do that. But if he's involved in something that might be detrimental or dangerous to other Americans in the country, we would want to do that. We would want to use that capability
of course,
to protect the American, you know.
Okay. Because I guess
when you start to use that same capability against a person like Donald Trump, who's running for the presidency, and we also suspect or we know, not only did he do it against Donald Trump, they did it against probably, and I think this will later come out, the 16 other political Republican candidates who were running in some degree or another, because, you know, they want to be able to have that information to pass on to, you know, be it Hillary Clinton or one of the other Democrats. This is how nefarious it was that they were doing this, because, you know, and, you know, thank God we had a guy by the name of, well, I lost my track here, but the current, at the time, director of the National Security Agency, went to Trump Tower, you know, on November 17th to warn Trump that, hey, they're using our capability against you, and Trump moved out and went to his golf course and resort in New Jersey, Bedminster, New Jersey.
Yes, I remember hearing that.
You know, so that was when everything started to slowly become apparent what the Democratic Party was doing, and then, of course, the whole situation with Mike Flynn, where they were monitoring his phone calls. And, you know, remember, you know, and I know Mike Flynn, I worked with him over the years when I was at CENTCOM. He was the director of intelligence. I was the deputy director for a period of time, and had worked with him. You know, it was Mike Flynn who was one of the people who developed the hunt for bin Laden, because he was the director of intelligence for the Joint Special Operations Command, which is basically the organization from which Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 operate under.
Wasn't that one of the main reasons Obama got rid of Flynn, and that he took?
Well, let's talk about that. You know, Flynn is a patriot. He's as an career intelligence officer like myself, you know, he was all about America and doing what's best for America and utilizing our capability to do what needed to be done. And when he became, he had a number of jobs after he left CENTCOM in 2009 or so, went up to Washington, D.C., worked at the ODNI, and then was tapped to be the director of Defense Intelligence Agency. And when he became the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency under Obama, his first criticism was how Obama handled Benghazi. He knew what was going on and spoke out against it. The other thing that he did was he was openly talking about radical Islamic terrorism, and it was the scourge of the world, and we needed to do something about the ideology, not just fight ISIS. And he was talking openly about it, and that was one of the things that really angered Obama. The third thing that happened was the intelligence community. There's 17 agencies in the intelligence community, and that's not overkill. They all have a job to do, and they do different things. And in intelligence, you want duplication and redundancy. That's a paramount part of intelligence. You can't have, well, one source, this is it, we're going with it. You have to have competing ideas, because that's how we foster and come up with, more accurate information. So the intelligence community has responsibilities also to each other. Everything in intelligence is built on requirements. Well, one of the big requirements and biggest users of intelligence is obviously the U.S. military. And we use it for two things: to go after our enemies, but also to protect ourselves. So we know what our enemy is planning against us. And one of the big suppliers of intelligence to the U.S. military is the CIA. And the CIA was run by John Brennan. Well,
yes.
everything in Washington, everything is run by budgets. Every agency in Washington has a budget, and every agency wants to try to do things bigger and better, supposedly. And they fight for budgets, and they fight for more money, and they want to do things better. And it's driven by personalities, because we all want to do the best we can with our responsibility. And so Brennan looked at the budget and says, I'm spending X amount of dollars to do support to the military. I have other things I want to do with that. And so his allegiance of support to the Defense Intelligence Agency, run by Mike Flynn, which is responsible for providing intelligence to the military, gets cut. And, the bureaucracy and everything that happened here, we could talk about this whole thing, how it went down for over an hour or more. But Mike Flynn says, hey, wait a minute, I'm starting to realize I'm not getting the intelligence that I should be getting from CIA. And he goes to Brennan and says, hey, you're shortchanging me. I need this to protect our guys and gals out there on the front lines. What's going on? You're not giving me what you used to give me. Brennan blows them off and says, we're doing what we're doing, you're getting what you're getting. Well, Flynn realizes, okay, I'm getting cut short. I've got to do something. And he fights back and forth through the bureaucracy and realizes he's not going to get anywhere. And he says, in the meantime, we are potentially going to lose more lives. I've got to do something. So being the patriot that he is, says, okay, I'm going to have to do it myself. You figure, I'm not getting what I need from others, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to rearrange my budget, not going to cut anybody short, but I'm going to do it better, faster, more efficient. And he starts doing his own intelligence to support U.S. military forces. Well, Brennan sees that and says, what Brennan was really trying to do was make Flynn look bad. And now Flynn basically says, well, okay, I'm going to do it myself. And he realizes, Flynn's figured it out. I've got to do something. So he goes, obviously, now we don't know this for sure, but this is the way it appears to have happened, went to Obama and says, okay, now you got to get rid of the guy. And Obama fires him, and they use the premise that he was violating policy, and he was a renegade, and he was doing things that he was supposed to be. And of course, in the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C., that's how things are happened, and Flynn was removed. So Flynn knows all this. So he's gone. He goes and starts his own business, like most people do when they get out of the military or go to work for somebody else. All of a sudden, Donald Trump taps him to be a national security advisor during the campaign. I was working with the Trump campaign during the campaign, and I knew Flynn, and I got called on to go give a presentation in Tampa to make America know that Donald Trump is going to be a good national security president. And, and Flynn is doing the same thing, and he's at Donald Trump's side all the time. He's part of the campaign. And then all of a sudden, by August of 2016, people are realizing Donald Trump's going to name him as his national security or someone high up in government.
Right.
We don't need Flynn there because Mike Flynn knows too much. Mike Flynn knows where all the bodies are buried. Mike Flynn knows where all the skeletons are in the closet in the FBI, the CIA, and all these people who worked to get rid of him when he was the director of DIA. Now Flynn's coming back, and he's going to be the National Security Advisor. He's going to have the keys to everything as the National Security Advisor. We can't have this guy there at all. So they came up with a plan how to get rid of him. Well, when you're the National Security Advisor, or you're named as the National Security Advisor, as he was right after Donald Trump got elected, you automatically start working. You become part of the transition team. You don't have to be confirmed by the Senate. You just start working. Now, naturally, the new president is the president-elect. Everybody wants to know and get to know the new president. All the foreign leaders, dignitaries, heads of state, the foreign policy people in other countries. It's like, he's going to be the president. I got to be the first to get to know him. So everybody is calling Mike Flynn. People are emailing him. People are, and trying to get in on the good side of the new president incoming. So, and of course, one of our, the biggest countries we deal with in the world that's dealing with military and national security and everything else, foreign policy, is Russia. Mm-hmm. So naturally, the Russian ambassador makes inroads with Flynn, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. And Flynn talks to him. Well, now, Brennan and Clapper and Comey now have the goods that he talked to them.
Sure.
And they go send, a couple FBI guys. You all heard the video or watched the video of Comey jokingly say, yeah, we sent a couple guys over.
Yeah, that was disgusting.
A couple guys over and interviewed them, but they filled, what the FBI uses is the 302 form, which is the standard form when you do an interview, and you keep, that's the note-taking form for the interview, and they type it out and they get back and they say, okay, how do we use this against him? Well, they changed it. They lied. They transformed what Flynn said changed the words and made it into a lie. And then they went to the vice president and said, we know Flynn talked to you about what was going on and who he's been talking to prior to the election, prior to the inauguration and shortly after. And Penn says, yeah. And then they go and say, oh, well, by the way, did you know he lied to you?
Yeah, he just came out the other day, Colonel. I don't know if you saw that or not, but Pence just came out the other day and said that he realizes now that it wasn't a lie after all.
Right.
Yeah.
It would be like if you told me one thing and someone who you did an interview with you from the FBI comes back to me and said, did you know Kathy lied to you? Mm-hmm. I'm going to like, really? No, he told me, or she told me this. Well, then it was like, well, here's the paperwork. We got it. They created the lie. It was fabricated.
Of course.
And
well,
that's
how is he
happened.
doing now?
So naturally, when the new national security advisor lies to the vice president, so they said,
it's a big thing. Yeah.
The only recourse was for Trump to fire him.
Unreal. How is he?
What they did.
How is he doing now, and what do you see as the final? I'm waiting for this Judge Sullivan to exonerate him. What are you thinking?
Well, a couple things are going to have to happen, and I know Sidney Powell very well. Had an opportunity to sit down with her for a few days, one-on-one.
When she came and spoke to your group,
she's aware, and she's been working really hard, and she's the reason she forced, so to speak, just because of good attorney work that she did, to show the judge and to show others that there's missing information. There's more we know. Actually, Flynn knew because he's the guy being charged. And they went, got his old law firm, who was in cahoots as well with.
Apparently so.
And the judge gave an order. You will turn over everything by May 4th, and so that last week they sent over all that stuff, which proved that it was all BS and that they made it up. So now the judge has to do a couple things. One, he has got to throw out the case.
You would think.
Or create it, or do a new case, and you have to wonder, well, how would you do a new case? The old case now is all built on lies.
Yeah.
It's all misrepresented. You can't hear a case on on false pretenses. You have to throw it out. So my belief is he's gonna, if he tries to hear a case on this, he's going to look like the biggest fool in the world. And he's going to be he's going to be looked at as, how can you even do this? I mean, I don't care how political you are as a lawyer, when it's out in the open that you're hearing a case under false pretenses, save your reputation and just say, I've got to throw it out. It's fake. It's BS.
Yeah, I thought he would have done it by now. Well, Colonel, I'm going to have to wrap this up. We're over an hour. I could talk to you forever. Okay. And I hope you're going to come back and that I'll figure this out with the, I'm not sure why we couldn't get you on actually FaceTime here, but I'd really like to have you back as we move along with the, and what are you doing to stay busy these days?
Well, I'm also the chairman of the Hillsborough County, Florida Republican Party, and it's an election year, and I'm getting candidates ready to run, and we've had a little bit of a hiatus here because of this crazy virus, and can't go out and do things. So, I'm anticipating the opportunity here now that we're opening Florida back up. Candidates can get out, and so we'll be holding candidate forums and events so candidates can get out and tell the American people, why they should be elected and why people should vote for them. So that's part of it. The rest of it is doing all the national security stuff and working and doing interviews on everything. And the Mike Flynn and the virus are going to keep me busy for at least the midterm. So it never ends.
I so appreciate you taking the hour and coming on my show here, and thank you for your continuing service. It sounds like you're really busy, and I know a lot of my listeners are from Tampa. So is there a place that you can tell them to contact to get involved, because this is such an important election?
Give the Hillsborough County Republican Party a phone call. You can just Google it. It's Hillsborough.gop, and all the contact information's there. Or look up the Trump 2020 Victory Campaign. You can get involved with the Trump campaign as well. They're housed right out of my office in Tampa.
That's the one with Dave Houston?
And Dave Houston.
Yeah, okay.
Dave was my handpicked guy to run that for Hillsborough, so he's doing a great job with what he's able to do. And once everything is open up, he'll be out on the ground. He'll be doing all kinds of events, and we're anticipating some Trump rallies in Tampa. We were supposed to have a Trump rally on March 25th, but the virus thing canceled. It was going to be at the fairgrounds.
Oh.
So, that's gonna happen. There'll probably be a number of those. The contract has been let with the fairgrounds for a few rallies. I can't get into the details on them.
This was going to be a rally with Trump there?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Just like all the in 2016 we did 5 rallies in Tampa for him.
Yeah, I was at one of them.
We did one in 2018.
I know you introduced him.
Yep, I got to be the MC of that, and I spoke at a few of the other ones in 16. So, we're looking at him coming back. We know because we had to cancel one so far this year. So,
well, let me know. Don't leave me out of those.
Oh, don't worry.
I'm in seeing Kaylee McInerney on here. She's doing a great job as the as the press person there. But because you're going to have her back, right? Because she had her baby when she was supposed to be speaking at your.
She lives in Tampa. She's from Tampa.
Oh yeah, right.
And we'll have events with other people. In the past we've had Steve Bannon, and we've had Matt Gaetz, and we've had the governors. And,
I met Matt.
So we plan on doing a lot.
Good. Well, listen, it was such a pleasure, and I will definitely be after you once I get this sorted out with having a split frame, because I'm excited. I'm just doing all this podcast thing for the first time, but I'm trying to get it out of the way so that when I get back on the road, because I'm starting to reschedule a lot of my speaking tours too now. Yeah, we're almost there. So Thank you very much for all the great information, and keep up the good work over there in
I
Hillsborough.
appreciate everything you're doing. You're doing just unbelievable work with your book and getting the word out of how to defeat the Democrats and the deep state. So please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Colonel. And I will be seeing you soon, I hope. You
Okay.
stay safe.
Take care now.
Okay, you too. All right, folks, so that was Colonel Jim Waurishuk, and we'll have him back on again. I don't know. I haven't seen any comments on here, so I think I did something wrong trying to do the split screen, but it's a learning process, and hopefully you'll tune back in when I have him back on again. So y'all stay safe, and thanks for joining the Deplorable Report, and we'll talk soon.